So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's Research and Innovation Days workshop on the new Pathfinder. Just while we're waiting for our audience to join and sort everything out and people to get settled, we're going to do a quick poll to find out who's in our audience today. So if we could publish the poll, please, and let everyone tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are. Choose one or two options that fit you today. Okay, and then while that's going on, I'll just explain a little bit about the idea of this session. So the idea of this session is to explore the value added by Pathfinder by bringing that under the umbrella of the new European Innovation Council and really expand on what the EU is doing to support bringing science to breakthrough technologies. So the European Innovation Council was set up to bridge Europe's innovation gap by helping to turn some of the amazing science we do in Europe into the applications, new businesses, and then help innovative startups to grow and compete on world markets. It's all about high impact, high risk ideas, and Pathfinder is one of the original ways of sort of kicking off that whole process. So we're just going to look at what the value of Pathfinder is, how it fits into the European Innovation Council, how well it works, what needs to change, what should be kept improved, and so on. We have 4, potentially 5 amazing speakers here with us today, and the format's going to run as follows. I'll ask each of the panelists a question. Each of them will have 4 minutes, no longer, to respond to me. There are going to be no presentations, so don't worry, it's just going to be their wisdom distilled into a 4-minute presentation. Then there's going to be an open discussion amongst the panelists, and then we'll open the floor to the audience. If you have any questions as they come up, it's going to be a packed session and I'm sure lots of questions will spring to mind. Please do ask them throughout the session using the Q&A tab to the right of the screen. And you'll also be able to vote on other people's questions. And we've got a section at the end where we're going to put the audience questions to the panelists. So please do submit them throughout the session. So with me, I have people who can bring very different perspectives to the table. First up, we have Dermot Diamond, a professor in chemical sciences at Dublin City University in Ireland and a member of the European Innovation Council Advisory Board. We've got Cristina Silva Pereira, a microbial biotechnologist. She's associate professor at the New University in Lisbon in Portugal. She's received FET, or Future and Emerging Technologies, the predecessor to Pathfinder, funding herself in the past. And she's a frequent evaluator of people's proposals for funding. So she's got a good perspective on the program as it works. We've got Paolo Dario, who is a professor of biorobotics and founder of the Biorobotics Institute at the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa, Italy. He has coordinated FET projects in the past, and he's been a very prominent ambassador of FET in the past. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say about its evolution into Pathfinder. And we have Christian Silvio Bolshoi, MEP, chair of the European Parliament's Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. So thank you very much for joining me. And let's kick off. We're going to be quite tight on time, so please do stick to your 4 minutes. Everyone who's not speaking, please turn the cameras off. I'll pop up at the end of your 4 minutes to tell you your time's up. And so my first question is for Dermot Diamond, please, who's just actually gone off the screen. But if you could come back, I'll put you up first. I just want to ask you a little bit about success, because success in the past for this sort of science fiction futuristic technology has been about the scientists showing results in the lab. Now that Pathfinder is part of the bigger EIC, how can we ensure this story doesn't just end in the lab? You've got 4 minutes starting now.
Okay, Joanna, thanks very much. What is stimulating this activity that we're trying to challenge is the recognition that Europe has been very good at doing research, fundamental and groundbreaking research, but not so good at translating this research into the marketplace and generating a return on investment in research that can be reinvested in additional research within Europe. As we're in comparison to the USA and China, we would not be as effective at doing this. And we've been looking at how we could possibly improve in that situation. And so the EIC has been created by amalgamating two previous European Union funding measures. One is called, it has come from the FET program, the Future and Emerging Technologies program, which was funding very high risk technology focused projects. And along with that is another pre-existing measure called the SME measure, and that was focused on companies. And it's this merging of the sort of venture company activity with the technology high risk research, I think, is the unique character that's been developed in the European Innovation Council. So what we have is within the EIC are two instruments. One is called Pathfinder, which is basically the rolling out of the FET program, pre-existing proactive and open tools into the Pathfinder program, and then Accelerator, which is the SME program. And our challenge is to see how we can link these very effectively together. So that's bringing together high risk research and innovation, driven mainly by researchers within research institutes and universities, with another element which is company focused, it's company driven and market focused. And if we can get that interface working, that would dramatically, I think, accelerate the deal flow from emerging technologies into emerging market opportunities. It's a very ambitious challenge, and if we were to do this, it could give us, for example, the emerging technologies linked to emerging market opportunities could give us a competitive edge for spinning out new companies. Of course, there are big challenges in there in how we effectively do this, because it's not just about creating the technology and bringing it towards the market. You have to de-risk. You have to link somehow into emerging beachhead markets that can stimulate scale up of these companies as well. And perhaps most of all, you need people and funding to make this happen. And within the EIC, there's a critical role then for people who understand the emerging technologies, can be aware of those, and also somehow aware of the emerging market opportunities. So the EIC is recruiting a cluster of what are called program managers, who I suppose have to have the superhuman quality of being able to see the emerging market opportunities and link them with emerging technologies that will give this competitive edge. We also then need a tool to allow this to happen. And within the discussions in the within the Pathfinder, we've had a working group working on this for the last 3, 4, 5 months. We've focused a lot on a tool called a transition tool, which pre-existed within FET. And we think that if this is expanded and given additional funding, the transition tool could be the mechanism that the program managers could exploit to try and identify these emerging technologies that have particular promise of delivering impact in a market, and picking them out of the project portfolios that they're assembling and accelerating their move towards the market. We don't have the DARPA type tools at the minute within the FET program, and in a way, this bringing together program managers with transition type tool might provide a way of bridging that gap. It's a very ambitious issue that we're trying to address, but it's also exciting. And if I could just finish, what we want to encourage within this is what we call an interventionist character to the program, which is not very common in the European Union portfolios of supported projects. In other words, that the program managers would have a role of actually intervening and picking out these projects and prioritizing their push towards the market. And that would give them great flexibility in how they actually implement the program.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dermot. I popped up because your 4 minutes are up, as you can imagine. I thought it was very interesting what you're talking about, merging this idea of high-risk research and venture. That's sort of the novelty of the European Innovation Council. Maybe Christian Silvio Bushoy, if I could turn to you next. So if you could turn on your camera and microphone. And the question I had for you is precisely about this sort of this merging of industry and very early stage science. What's your approach? What's your opinion of this approach by the European Commission to bring science and industry closer together in this way in the European Innovation Council? And should this sort of be reflected throughout the wider policy community, for example, in the European Parliament?
Well, my reply is very clear. European Parliament is convinced that this is crucial, and we try to support this approach as much as possible as a legislative body. Of course, the European Commission has less leverage than the Commission to do that, because we are not implementing any funding program, be it for science or for industry or for the territories, but the legislation is coming from European Parliament, and the political signal from European Parliament always was heard and was taken into account by European Commission or other European bodies which are managing different programs. I can give you also an example of EP action, European Parliament action of today. We had this morning a hearing on vaccines for COVID-19. My committee, ITRE committee, the committee that I'm president, chair, and also ENVI committee, the Environment and Health committee. And we had there all the stakeholders. Science, which was represented by a professor from Imperial College. Industry was there via two pharmaceutical companies, and also the industry associations at the EU level, and the regulatory authorities, the European Medicine Agency, and we are the policymakers. I believe that this is just an example. Of course, what was presented earlier, what the Pathfinder is doing is to do much extensively in many other areas. And of course, the Commission should do this in a much broader extent, bringing together science closer to industry through common rules between the funding programs of the Commission to allow finally the synergies between research policy and the structural funds to happen. You know that we discussed about this since FP7, and we still have to work on real synergies in order to take place effectively. Of course, projects supported by European Commission via Horizon programs and via other programs are more and more closer to the needs of the society and what the industry is asking. But of course, we could do more. Bringing science closer to industry is also a mission of the EIT through the knowledge triangle. This is why European Parliament is calling for the Commission to assess at the occasion of the mid-term review of the EIT, for example, the feasibility to bring closer the bodies that will implement Pillar 3 of Horizon Europe in one-stop shop for innovation, namely EIC, EIT, and Eurostars. Our landscape remains too fragmented for the beneficiaries, and here the biggest problem is with SMEs, because they have the biggest problem to go into these programs. So in fact, let me conclude by saying that it's not just science and industry that need to be closer, that they constantly talk to each other, but we have to work to act on the whole chain. Science, demonstration in the EU, including through other funding programs, framework conditions to make it attractive and fast for a company to exploit research results in the EU, because most of the companies do the research in the EU, often with public funds, and then exploit the results somewhere else in the world because they need to be the first on the market. Framework conditions include, among other norms and standards, a revision of competition policy, public procurements that go from research to commercialization. And here we have examples in the world, and of course, maybe the best example could be to look what US is doing, because the synergy between science and industry and profitability and competitiveness, I think there is the best acknowledged in the world. Now, final word is the fact that we also need to take into account that bringing science and industry together should never be at the detriment of fundamental and free academic research. Scientists' work cannot be dictated by the industry, but of course we are talking here about synergies and better coordination, and this is something very important. Very happy to be here today with you. Unfortunately, I cannot stay after 3:30 because I have to go in another meeting as chair of ITRE committee, but I was also at the opening ceremony of the R&E days, and I believe that we should support better, we should fight for even a bigger budget for the next Horizon Europe, and all these initiatives that we are discussing now should be supported politically, and also we should take to be sure that the results will be as efficient as possible. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. So more of this type of thing, but maybe still some bit of work to do to actually get the real value out of it as much as we can. Okay, and we've been joined by also Jean-David Malo, who is the director of the European Innovation Council. He's a European Commission employee, and he is going to hopefully talk to us a little bit about this sort of the mashup between science and innovation. The EIC is called the European Innovation Council, and there's a bit of a worry that in Innovation Council is all to do with business, investment, and the science might get a little bit lost. So Jean-David, if I could hand over to you, and you can tell us a little bit about where scientists and this sort of science, futuristic science to technology fits in within the EIC. Jean-David, are you there? You could turn on your microphone and camera. No, we're having a few problems with him. So we'll come back to Jean-David Malo. And then in the meantime, then we'll get the view from a scientist. So Christina, if Christina Silva Pereira is there and able to turn on her camera and microphone, hi, we're going to cut to you and get a scientist's view. I mean, you've been a previous recipient of this type of funding for your science to technology research. And from your point of view, what's the main challenges for scientists with a breakthrough idea? We talk a lot about funding, and here's the money coming through, but what else is there? Is it just about money, or there are lots of other supports? And what's the role of Pathfinder here? So 4 minutes for you.
Thank you, Joanna. Hello, everyone. So I think the first challenge goes in the direction of academic tradition. So academic tradition clashes with disruptive ideas, and to implement disruptive ideas is often seen or perceived as a threat to knowledge. It doesn't fit most of the funding opportunities, and most of the fundamental-oriented research institutes do not also create the best environments to the development of this disruptive research. This is changing, but it's a slow change. The second challenge, I think, is the idea that scientists are not velocity runners. We are marathoners. And to use this inspire basic research, a statement that has been used to define Pathfinder, is actually a slow endeavor. And it gets even slower when we move towards interdisciplinary research. So there is the need to build a common language of understanding between different disciplines and industrial partners also. And the problem is that many of the funding opportunities miscalculate the speed of interdisciplinary research. And this gets more problematic because there is a lack of seed funding opportunities to actually get preliminary evidence that is essential to demonstrate plausibility, and also to support the networking activities to implement the proposal itself. We need other things apart from money, for sure, and this has been somehow mentioned by the other speakers. We need a system that actually facilitates the dialogue between scientists and companies, but that needs to be set in a safe, supervised, and uncomplicated setup. We also, I think, as a scientist, we need more and more diverse opportunities for being trained in management and negotiation skills. And I think this was mentioned by the previous speaker. We need to guarantee that we actually build true synergies with freedom but equal opportunities. So academia is often seen as the poor relative in the partnerships with industry, and that lack of parity creates a bias that I think needs to be changed. The last point is that the time limit for project implementation competes against the discovery process. And because of that, we are wasting opportunities to actually reach a mature disruptive technology. And so I think to alleviate we need funding programs that have more flexible implementation times and the opportunity to negotiate second funds after a new evaluation process. And this is something that happens in the US funding in some of the mechanisms. The Pathfinder plays a key role here because it is challenging one of the established concepts of European research, that is the PI-centered research, my lab, my publications. And by promoting the research on project-centered research with an interdisciplinary basis is obviously promoting innovation, is promoting new collaborations, also with partners from the industry, and this, I think, will contribute to productivity. If there is any doubts of the contribution of the Pathfinder, I think we can see what the Pathfinder has generated. And apart from the publications in top journals, 10% of the projects that have been funded have generated spin-off, and I think this is an impressive number. 1/4 have generated one patent or more, and I think 40% of the projects were implemented with an industrial partner engaged. And this is a paradigm change, and I think is a paradigm change that should be supported further. As a final note, since Joanna has not still appeared, there is a lot of discussion between the clash between the FET program and the ERC. I have been involved in the FET project, but I am also an ERC grantee. And so I think there is much more in common between these two mechanisms that they might appear at the obvious interpretation.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you for this time. Just a reminder to everybody in the audience, if questions arise as our speakers are talking, then please do pop them in the Q&A session, vote on each other's questions, and we can put them to the speakers at the end, because I know we're quite tight for time at this stage. I'd like to see if Jean-David Malo is able to connect. And Jean-David, if you're here, could you put on your camera and your microphone? And I'll try and ask you the question I wanted to ask you. No, I think we're still having problems with him. So without delay, we'll move to Paolo Dario. So Paolo, if you could stick on your camera and microphone, please. And for Paolo, I'm really interested. You've been around the Pathfinder's predecessor, Future Emerging Technologies, for a number of years. You're a strong proponent of them and a previous recipient of funding. I'd like to get your views on the application criteria. There's some criteria, such as the need for interdisciplinary research. In your view, are these really necessary? Could they restrict innovation? Could they be improved? And what are some of the most important criteria for you? So Paolo, if you could switch on your camera. We lost Paolo. Lost Paolo, and we've lost Jean-David Malo. So maybe if our other panelists wouldn't mind switching back on their cameras, and we can jump into the panel debate section. Okay. So I know a couple of you have mentioned it already, but I really want to sort of look at success. You know, we've had the Future and Emerging Technologies program for a number of years. We still have this innovation gap in Europe. We've got Jean-David Malo. Hello.
Hi, do you hear me?
We do hear you. Welcome.
Wonderful, finally. I'm very sorry for this, Joanna.
No problem at all. So I'll give you your time in the spotlight before we go into the panel discussion then, seeing as we've managed to get you. So sorry, Dermot, you'll have to wait a couple of minutes before we can get your opinion. So Jean-David, your question is, so this idea about will we lose the science? You know, we're bringing it into the European Innovation Council. You know, there's innovation in the name. A lot of the focus of the European Innovation Council is about getting scaling up startups, getting investment, getting the venture capital. I think there's a bit of worry that the science might get lost. So can you tell us a little bit about where the science fits into the European Innovation Council?
No, many thanks for this question, Joanna, because I mean, this question is a question that I'm hearing since the idea, of course, of the launch of the European Innovation Council, because as you said rightly in the title of the institution, I mean, the research does not appear. But it's very important to clarify that indeed, what is our ambition with the European Innovation Council? And I was listening to you. In fact, I was not able to connect, but I was listening to you, and it was already underlined by Dermot in its first talk. What we would like to do with the European Innovation Council is to do two things mainly. First, to continue to remain leaders at world level in our capacity to generate knowledge in disruptive ideas, in disruptive science, radical science that can turn ultimately into innovation, in particular in the technology area. And on this, we have a very excellent track record over the last 30 years with a program which is Future Emerging Technology in Europe. And it would be, of course, irrelevant to stop our effort in this domain if we want to remain leaders in the world in a number of domains. But we have also in Europe a very important weakness, and this is the other side, which is our incapacity or remaining difficulty to transform, in fact, our strengths in generating knowledge to innovation that can ultimately create jobs and growth for the benefit of our citizens. And these two legs are in fact the two legs of the European Innovation Council. So the one we are talking a lot, of course, are the one dedicated to tackle our main weaknesses, this incapacity not to generate startups, because we are generating more startups in Europe than in the US in the last 2 years, but to accompany, in fact, our startup in their growth and in particular in their speed scale-up. So this is what we are calling the accelerator, and I will not insist in this session about this. But the first leg, the upstream dimension, if I could say it this way, of the EIC, is indeed to stimulate the emergence of emerging new technologies that can make a change. And this is clearly a place where science is taking a big role, where researchers are taking a big role. And this is the whole purpose of what we are calling now the EIC Pathfinder in a bottom-up approach, and the bottom-up approach will remain certainly the most important dimension, budgetary speaking, within the Pathfinder, but also in a top-down approach, like we were doing it in the past with the FED Proactive program. Now, what is the main difference? The main difference is that we must, first of all, continue to build on the success of FED. So no question to challenge what has been done up to now. We should continue what has been done in the context of FED, but we should add something else. And this something else is to accompany our consortia in their identification of knowledge that could be turned into innovation at any time, and to provide them, therefore, with the tools to do that. My friend Dermot mentioned the roles of program managers in this context. He mentioned also our current reflection on what we are calling transition activities, because there is a potential to do something after a Pathfinder project in order to create this gap, to tackle this gap, between what we are supporting up to now in the context of FET and what we are supporting in the context previously of the SM instrument and now the EIC accelerator. So we need this new approach, more focused and more targeted to the use of the knowledge we are generating. But you remember, and I will conclude there, when we were launching the idea of the EIC, I had a long discussion about this, the place of researchers in the EIC, with my friend, the Secretary General of Leroux, Kurt de Ketteler. And he told me, why do you want me to support an instrument which is only supporting enterprise? But we spent a couple of hours, and he discovered that indeed the EIC was not only on the support to SMEs. This is the part we are advocating the most, because this is the part where we have to do more. But this very important pillar, the Pathfinder, and this is the reason why we have this session, like others during the RNI days, is also very crucial. And thank you for this question, Joanna, for highlighting the fact that the EIC is not only for entrepreneurs, the EIC is not only for investors, the EIC is also for researchers. The EIC is for any type of innovators.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to see if Paolo Dario is back with us. I know he was very keen to speak and actually was the only presenter who had a slide to treat us all to. But I don't know if Paolo, if you're, you can switch your camera and microphone on and join us. Nope, I don't think he's with us anymore. So we can maybe jump into the panel discussion now then. So if everyone else who's around could turn their cameras and microphones on. Okay, great. So we'll go back to talking about success. As I was mentioning, we've had FET for a number of years. You've touched a bit on sort of how Pathfinder is maybe different, taking things forward, with the view to sort of bridging this Europe's innovation gap. So my question is sort of concretely, science can be measured through research papers, through impact factor and so on, businesses through return on investment, shareholder pricing and so on. How do you measure the success in this area? And in 5 to 10 years' time, how will we know if we're doing the right thing? How will we know, what will the landscape look like if Pathfinder works? So question first to Dermot Diamond. We can't hear you. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay, now you can hear me. Okay, so the success within the European Innovation Council would be reflected in a more dynamic transfer of ideas from high-risk projects through to market impact. Now, one of the problems you are confronted with there, and there are many things that we could talk about here, we could talk about this for days, but one of the big issues is that this pathway from early research, high-risk research towards the market, first of all, it's very risky because it's high risk. So not all projects will go in that direction successfully. But secondly, it can often take a long time to actually realize the market and have that impact. And that can take 10, 15, 20 years in some cases. So we have to be patient about this. We have to be convinced that this is the right thing to do, because at the end, if we get this translation to happen effectively, what we will do is create a much more dynamic company scene, jobs, high-tech jobs within Europe, which will then generate the additional wealth that will be reinvested back into the future high-risk research. So until we create this or strengthen this virtuous cycle of investment, research, innovation, creation of wealth, until we do this more effectively, we won't have the resources to actually expend on the research. So it's incumbent on the researchers to become involved in that way, but it's also important that the people who watch this are not expecting a huge change immediately. This will not happen. It will happen gradually. I've got lots more I could say, but I see that Paulo has connected. So perhaps I should stop there and let Paulo speak.
Yes, let's if Paulo is time in the sun. Paulo, welcome back after the technical problem. I just had a question for you about the criteria for funding. What makes this kind of funding successful? We have a criteria, for example, on interdisciplinary research at the moment. Is that necessary? Is it right? Is it wrong? Yeah, what are the key criteria for you in terms of breakthrough technology?
Apologies, actually, I was listening. I tried to talk, but anyhow, I hope that you can see my slide. There are some technical issues here, but because my slide really contains almost all my points and answers to your question, I just wish to visualize these two banks, what we call the valley of death, that essentially create a big obstacle, especially in Europe, but almost everywhere between research and industry and market. One point is that the two communities living on the two banks, the one on research, the one in industry, live very well in that bank. There are people. Many of us are full-time researchers, so we are only interested in producing papers, having impact, H index, all these results, which are very satisfactory. On the other side of the valley, there are many people who live very well by dealing with the market, creating new products, creating international competition and market and so on, and doing with finance and so on. There are occasionally, well, actually not occasionally, but there are quite often interactions, bilateral interactions. But really what we are interested, actually, I had my first FET project in 2000, so I know very well, is how to cross the valley. And this is, in a sense, if you will, a little bit of difference between ERC and FET, who are in the left bank, but the difference is that the FET researchers are inclined to look with a telescope, let's say, to application. And some of them are brave enough to try to cross the bridge. Not many people, but this is really our focus. I believe that our focus is for the part that relates to what is the link between research and industry. Because, as I said, many people live very well in either of the two banks. Is to try to help brave innovators to cross. This happens on the top of this slide. You can see two practical cases I've been involved in. So the dream of a biomechatronic hand that started with a FET project in 2000, or the dream of creating a painless endoscope that starts by the scientific analysis on the worm. And all of both concepts were brought through FET actions and other action to what is today real application and industrial implementation, industrial exploitation of this, mostly through the same innovators and researchers who were at the beginning. So the real point is address and stimulate and help, and as a professor, this is really my goal, to develop, to foster innovators, to create people who are brave, who really dream, not only of doing very good research, but also exploring what is on the other side of the valley. So the EIC can be an extraordinary instrument in order to facilitate that. But the core of the problem is about innovators. And we have a very, very important, I would say unique characteristic in Europe. We are the area where interdisciplinary is in our culture. Our culture is about interdisciplinarity. Our children, our young researchers do not need to be encouraged too much to, actually they have not to be discouraged to exploit interdisciplinarity, because good interdisciplinarity, high quality in this interdisciplinarity in the people is the secret to help those people to cross the valley and to exploit, to put at work for themselves and for the country and for Europe their talents.
Get your intervention in. So we will go back into the panel to discussion now. So if all the other presenters could switch on their microphones and cameras, Paolo, if you could remove your slide, that would be perfect. And just a quick reminder, we're having questions and answers flooding in, which we are going to get time to go to, I promise. But if you have any more or you want to vote on the questions, please do so in the box on the right. Just to continue with our discussion, I suppose we talk about Pathfinder being new, but it's already been running in its pilot phase for a while. What have we already learned in the pilot phase that we can take forward, we can improve, and how do you envisage Pathfinder evolving in the future? I suppose that question, first of all, is for Jean-David Malo, and then I'll come to the others. And please do raise your hands if you want to respond, so I can call on you.
Thanks, Joanna. So as you said, we are starting to test a number of things, but we are at the very beginning of the testing. What remains to be, and this is a challenge, and we are working on it, especially with colleagues like Dermot, is how to make this link between what I will call a usual Pathfinder project, a usual FET project, and the turn to what we are calling transition activities. So how to make this link between what was initially a vision, as mentioned by Paolo, but based on science and very, very early TRL stage of development that could go up to TRL 3, TRL 4, but where at a moment, if you want to start moving and crossing the valley of death, you have to bring something else, and you have to, in particular, create relation with a number of other actors, be it on the domain of the market, but being also on the domain of regulation, on other type of skills that maybe you have not yet in the team that you have created initially to make only research and technical development, but where you have to acquire new type of talents if you want to move to the other side, to the other bank, and therefore to be able to create a spin-off and ultimately a startup or an SMEs. There, let's be honest, we are not yet there, Joanna. I mean, we launched a number of things in the context of FET. We had, for example, this very good initiative of the Launchpad. We launched in the context of the pilot first attempt of transition activities on which we are learning because they have just started. But we have still to fine-tune what are the relevant type of tools that we need in order to build this bridge between the two parts of the banks as mentioned by Paolo. And this is certainly one of the main challenges that we have in the side of the Pathfinder, because on the upper side, I mean, there we know how it works. I mean, and we have, and Paolo and Dermot can demonstrate it. We have something that is running, so it would be very dangerous to review everything. But on this part where we have our main weaknesses for the time being, we are just testing a number of things like tech to market activities, tech to tech activities, maybe a marketplace. Because last thing that I would like to add before, and I don't want to monopolize the floor, is that Paolo said something very right. You have a number of brave people that are ready to move from one bank to another. But we should not forget that you have another possibility. You have other people that were not at the origin of the idea who could get the knowledge and transfer it to the other bank. And this tech transfer, the dynamism, is certainly another way, certainly even more powerful in terms of potential, that we should not forget.
Christina, maybe I can bring a scientist's voice as someone who sort of participates in the project. What's your response to this sort of, the opportunities for tech transfer and other improvements that we could do for the FET Pathfinder to really encourage this chain, this innovation chain?
I think that someone mentioned before, I think it was Dermot, that mentioned that high risk requires time and that we need to be patient. And I think this patience is not on the right proportion still in the FAT Open programs and in Pathfinder. So if we are talking about truly disruptive ideas, interdisciplinary ideas, the time to mature, and I can give the project I was involved as an example, when we actually knew sufficiently to go in the direction of the technology, the research time that we had to implement the project was finishing. And if we resubmit again, it would not be considered novel. So this measure between the plausibility and the novelty is something that I think it can be improved. It's not, I don't have a strict answer because it's a complex debate, but I see a lot of proposals as an evaluator that they are excellent examples of interdisciplinary disruptive research, but they published before, so they are not novel, and they are penalized by that. And then I see crazy ideas that, they are cool, but we don't know if they are plausible because there is no sufficient preliminary evidence. So to find the balance between these and to find the right duration of these projects and the mechanism to actually allow them, as I said, to apply to a second round of funds. If they have good results and they have not destroyed their initial idea, why shouldn't they be given conditions to actually exploit it until the level of the technology? So it's all about the time and the patience, in my life.
And I know, Paolo, that's something you've talked about in the past, this time sort of from a very initial idea to the market could be 40 years. So how do we account for that? What the best way when you've got investors chomping at the bit to invest in European companies?
Well, actually, I'm very optimistic. I believe that Horizon Europe seems the best framework program I ever seen. The most consistent, the point, the issues have been understood. I think Jean-David made a very, very clear description of this, but also Christina. Actually, we now understand what is happening, what is happening from the conception, the TRL 0, if you will, the dream, to the end, and what we need to do. The point, 2 points I'd like to make. One is time scale, as Joanna, you said. I learned that the time scale can be very long, even 20 years, in fact. But of course, there are intermediate results. University is very good in that. The role of university is to have a very long time framework, a dream that can last for the entire career of a person, even more. And so let's invest in university that essentially, really, we nurture talents and we give them the perspective. The second point is the ecosystem. There is no doubt, my students are hired by companies and universities all around the world, like yours, I'm sure. So we educate some of the best talent. So why we are not able to create the right ecosystem in Europe to keep our children here and even to attract others? And this is a big question. We know is a social issue, but it's improving. It's improving. Europe is becoming more attractive than before.
Okay, Dermot, just a quick question. Okay, you wanted to respond there. You can jump in.
Yeah, I think some very important points there raised by my colleagues on the panel. Christina is absolutely correct. And the fact that and also Paulo, this issue of time and how you maintain an idea when it appears that you've already solved the issues as far as the academic world is concerned, and you can't publish papers on it because you've already published papers on it, but it's not in a state where you can actually bring it to the market. So how do you continue to do the work of de-risking that technology and make it more attractive to a company, an SME or a multinational, or to a venture investment? And in USA, they're able to do this much more effectively because they can create research-focused companies that are still associated with the research groups. And these companies can exist for 5, 10 years while they're still de-risking the technology. We don't tend to do that very effectively in Europe. And the other things that they have is this way of rapidly scaling up a company that appears to have a solution by, for example, through DARPA, where they create what they call beachhead markets. And often these are developed through military procurement programs, where they will put out a specification for a technology and say they will buy X amounts of units at a certain price if people can meet this spec. And this drives a lot of innovation, because now if you can meet that spec, you have a guaranteed initial market that you can fulfill. So the value of your company, even though it's only getting going into the marketplace, goes way up. Now, we don't have a mechanism for doing that within Europe, and I think we need to think about that and how we create these sorts of initial stimulation markets that give a cash flow into these technology companies and get them up off the ground. My last point I'd make, David mentioned about transitioning a Pathfinder type project, which would be a Fed open, Fed proactive project, into the accelerator at the end of the project. We go beyond that and say we need to intervene during the course of the project. All too often the calls come out at the end of the project, and by the time you've secured the additional finance to continue your work, your project team is disintegrated, it's gone. The talented research fellows and postdocs have got jobs in industry or academic. You don't have anybody to do the work. So you have to try and rebuild your team. And this cycle goes on continuously within an academic career, and you get so far and then you collapse and then you have to rebuild. What we want to do is have an intervention that happens during the project while the talented young people are still in position, because they are the people who will take the risks. Generally speaking, it's not the academics.
Okay. Some excellent points there. I just want to, sorry, Christine, I'm going to cut you off because we need to get into audience questions. There's a lot waiting for responses. Dermot, yeah, perfect. So I'm going to give you 3 at once. They're sort of operational about the Pathfinder. So I think Jean-David, maybe I'm going to direct them to you first. How are you going to define the top-down topics of Pathfinder? What's the budget breakdown of Pathfinder with respect to the accelerator? And the second one is a sort of a competition question. How are you going to manage the sectoral nature of EIT, the non-sectoral nature of EIC, because it looks like there's maybe some competition between the two. So Jean-David, if I could open the floor to you. Could you turn your microphone on? Sorry, Jean-David, we can't hear you. There we go, you're on now.
It's okay?
Yep.
Thank you. The top down. So we are currently we have currently launched a number of work in order to identify the various topics. So we made, first of all, an assessment of what we had in our project that we have financed in the past, because it could give you, or it could give us already a good picture of what exists. Looking also at what was emerging in the lecture everywhere in the world, what are the emerging ideas. We have used also our program managers in order to identify a number of potential themes, and we are now also, in the context of the RNI days, trying to discuss with various communities on what are the topics that are the most promising. Of course, in this context, we are also taking into account the policy orientation at the level of the union. But regarding the Pathfinder, I mean, by definition, there the policy orientation are less accurate in order to make the choice. So this is globally how it will take place. In the future, it will be certainly a bit different, because we will have a bit more of program managers with a better knowledge of what we have in our portfolio, so their role will be certainly more important. But this is a progress and a system in process. Now, regarding the budget breakdown, it's too early to tell you how it will be broken down, but you have already a number of indications that are there. The Parliament and the Council, in their political general agreement achieved in the spring of 2019 on the text of Horizon Europe, as far as the EIC is concerned, so the whole EIC, covering both Pathfinder, Accelerator, business acceleration services, and so on, made clear that at least 70% of the budget must go to startup and SMEs. If you add to this that you have additional requirement, like for example, the fact that the minimum budget should go to grant towards SMEs at a similar level of what we have provided in the context of Horizon 2020, you can already have a good idea by saying that you would have something like 70-30% if you compare the main blocks. It's really plus or minus 5-10%. But globally, this is what the order of magnitude that you will have if you want to fit with this kind of constraints that we have already now in the legal text. It's not a big surprise, because this is more or less what we have already in the context of the pilot. If you look at the pilot today, you have a bit more than $1 billion in 2020, which is going to the accelerator, a bit less than $500 million, which is going to the Pathfinder. So you are more or less in the same order of magnitude. But of course, all of this will be discussed, and in particular will depend on the final decision regarding the whole budget that will be provided to the EIC. Now, your last question, very quickly. The two are very complementary in reality. And I just would like to highlight two or 3 points to demonstrate it. You have today 8 kicks in the EIT that are, as you said rightly, Joanna, thematic oriented, while on the side of the EIC, we are mainly bottom up. So by definition, you have not exactly the same type of potential clients. But nevertheless, we could have the same clients that could benefit from the services of the two institutions at different level. Look, for example, in the context of a kick like InnoEnergy, which is certainly the most advanced regarding the identification and emergence of startups. The size of support which is provided in the context of the EIC Accelerator cannot be provided in the context of InnoEnergy. And there, what we have created in the legal basis of Horizon Europe is that we can have a fast-track procedure allowing that a startup emerging from a kick of the EIT could have a particular access to the EIC Accelerator in order to speed up its growth. Alternatively, we are developing a number of business acceleration services, but you have also a lot of business acceleration services that have been developed thematically in the context of the kicks that could be of huge benefit for EIC beneficiaries. In the context of the Pathfinder also, not only in the context of the accelerator. So the access to a better knowledge of the ecosystem in a particular domain, access to skills that can be developed in a particular area, are type of things that exist in certain domain developed by KICS. We should build on it and create synergies with them.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I'm going to stop you there.
We are signing together a cooperation in order to reinforce this complementarity.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We've got 2 minutes left, and I just want to get in an interesting question about ethics. We're talking about high-risk, cutting-edge scientific developments, disruptive tech. To what extent will the new Pathfinder involve ethical and societal impacts and responsible and ethical research and investment? Dermot, do you want to take that one?
Hi, thanks, Joanna. That's a very interesting question. I was a member, I was joint chair of the FED advisory group, and one thing that we did discuss a lot was this cross-disciplinary interdisciplinary research ethos within FET. It's really important. It goes to the core of what the program is trying to achieve. And we certainly, it's our ambition that this type of culture will be distilled across into Pathfinder and retained within Pathfinder. So there are a number of us who are previously from the FET advisory group, and we're on the European Innovation Council advisory board. And we would be very keen that this type of flavor is retained within the projects. And it's for a very practical reason, because if you're interested in going towards the market, if you don't have the ethical and social side of things covered as early as possible within your research, then you could have a fantastic idea that society would never adopt. So what's the point? So we think it's really important. We'd love to have it retained within the Pathfinder program.
Okay, perfect. I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to stop it there. We've reached the end of our time, whilst we could have carried on for a long time, I think. Thank you ever so much to all the panelists for joining. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. They're being answered online, so hopefully you'll get an answer, even if our panelists couldn't address them directly. So enjoy the rest of R&I days, and thank you very much again to everyone for joining. Goodbye.
Bye, Joanna.
Bye-bye. Thank you ever so much for that. Sorry you didn't get all your points in.
That's okay.
It always happens.
That's okay.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.